Okay, so Derek, thank you once again for talking to me. To follow up on our interview from a couple of years ago when we talked about the work that you were doing at Mattamy Homes, and this discussion comes because students have been watching the interview that you recorded previously, and they've been asking what happened after that. So that's really where we're going to start today. Is really just to say what have you been doing since that interview, and how has that been going?
Sounds good. And thank you for having me back here. Honored to be here as I was last time. And I'm glad to hear that your students have been finding this helpful. So as far as what's happened since last time, um, I actually had to look back at our last video for me to actually digest where we stood. But I'm still anatomy. I'm still working on a portion of my work, at least, is still on the digital transformation work, the building information management work, BIM. We're kind of going through a little rebrand with it as well. We're referring to it as VDC, so virtual design and construction. However, at the basis of it, it really is still the same thing, and that is still progressing. But I think just referring back to our last conversation as well, I talked a lot about how there's if you don't progress in a stepwise fashion in terms of bringing change, it's very easy in some cases to get not necessarily backlash, because that's not the right word. It's more so resistance, or I've deferred to calling it an autoimmune response from the business, because that is how it kind of feels like. It feels like an allergic reaction in a way, right? Pollen, breathing is like pollen allergies. You breathe it in. Pollen is just pollen, right? It's not technically supposed to damage you, but your body will react to it because it's something that seems foreign. So if you integrate something that doesn't seem natural, at least at first glance, that is a very easy knee-jerk response from an organization. And I know in business school at least they teach us corporate entities are recognized by law as a as an individual as well. So there's some parallels to that. And so through where we stood during our conversation last time, my stance is still very much the same, that the technology is a helpful one, and we are trying to use that digital technology to change the way that we build. However, and this is the important piece, is I realize that there are earlier steps that we needed to take in order to fully leverage this technology. So, we talked about how we could benefit from using this technology, how fully integrated it is in terms of using it to be able to generate takeoffs or build materials, how we can use this to vet our construction sequencing. All that still remains true. The difference, however, and what I've learned, is that all that is predicated on how well our designs are suited to be able to be digitized. And there are steps even before the digitization. How well are we designing our homes to be able to be replicated by this process? So the investment into digitization is one thing, but the repeated investment from a business standpoint, that is where we can sometimes fall flat. Because if, for instance, we're designing at Mattamy, in my division, we are looking at low-rise homes across the Greater Toronto area. So if we continue to redesign our homes for different municipal requirements, or differences in interpretation of building codes, or setback requirement differences that are unique to municipalities, and therefore changing some of the shapes and how we can maximize that the lot fabric, that becomes challenging, because that means that there's more and more models that we have to digitize. So ultimately, what my team is now doing, we like again on the topic of rebranding. I'm no longer I think my title during our last meeting was BIM and strategic sourcing. My team is now referred to as applied technologies. And so I think that's an important rebrand because aside from simply, well, nothing simple about it, but aside from just working on BIM, the idea is that we're looking at different ways to integrate technology. And when I refer to technology, I take it back to any tool, right? Like a caveman would have referred to a hammer as technology because they don't need to, they're not just grabbing a random piece of stone and, whacking stuff with it. So, any tool that increases our productivity in my mind is considered technology. So what we're doing right now is we are integrating some of those thoughts that I just mentioned and how we design such that we can maximize our efficiencies in terms of designing and deploying. Ultimately, we are a production builder. We have the volume. So in order to leverage that volume and build economies of scale, we have to align our design practices, our purchasing practices, and our construction practices in a way that will maximize that value chain's efficiency. So that's where we are now. We are creating these new plans. And this, again, a couple of times we talked prior to even doing our first interview. I was a bit concerned because whatever I brought to the table wouldn't necessarily be a completed or concluded state. So it really is still a work in progress. And even now, we are still sort of pushing this ahead. And it's not straightforward. And I think if there's anything I've learned since our last interview, it's really that. And you see that discussed on different at business schools or on different forums. When you look at an implementation that is a success or a failure or whatever it might be, you see an end state, but from the starting point to get to that end state, there is usually a lot of iteration, a lot of moving around, a couple of steps forwards, a few steps back, and so on and so forth. And living through it, I really do see that. And I think right now we're in the many, many steps forward stage, but I'm also not, I'm not afraid if there's things that don't work out as well, because those are lessons that allow us to dig down into what we need to improve, how we redeploy in the future. And I think that's an important takeaway that I've gained over the past, I think, 2 or 3 years since our last conversation. But if it's worthwhile, and if you still believe that whatever you're working on is worth the effort, you'll keep working on it, and you'll ultimately find an answer to how to deploy it. And so now that we're working on these new plans that integrates some of this thinking, it allows us an opportunity to really show the value. The other thing that I did mention, I think last time as well, and that I didn't quite learn until recently is, well, not that recently, I guess, maybe a few months after our interview, is that simply bringing digital into into an existing operation and having the tool there is not enough. We need to figure out when that piece of technology needs to be deployed, and how to integrate it really with the rest of the business. And a lot of that, because the technology is new, most of the time it doesn't fit into the old process. So finding the cleanest spot to integrate it into the existing process usually yields a result that is suboptimal. It can still work. That was how we approached it previously. So I think when we talked last time, BIM was being still, our test case was being implemented at the working drawing stage. So that's usually when we get to working drawings, that's post design. The architect has already gone through it. They've given HVAC routing and structural design considerations as far as an architect can take it. Obviously, it's not stamped by an engineer, but it's taken pretty far. And then what happens though is, and what I've learned going through a few more of those cycles is that that time is there's a lot of work that is happening during that time, because that's at the same time as when our structural engineers and our mechanical engineers are going in and looking through our HVAC plumbing structure and essentially making the skeleton work within that design that was created by the architects. By and large, it's worked. And in the past, in the low-rise world, again, because we build under Part 9 building code generally, even though Mattamy exceeds it, it's still a wooden structure. So if there's issues with it, it's simple to, I'll again put quotes around simple, but the adjustments to those issues means taking a saw or maybe a hammer, knocking down a couple of pieces of wood, and then reframing it, right? It's a little bit of a different, I guess, cost to any mistake than a poured concrete wall or a steel structure, for instance. So where we sit right now, though, is that we need to be able to, like, at that stage, when we're looking at working drawings, again, they don't, because the lower cost of mistakes at that stage, it becomes less so of a focus. And so there's a lot happening, but the drawings aren't necessarily taken as 100% when we're building it anyways. So there's a lot of contradictions in that space. But ultimately, what will help us launch a better rollout is that we need to do a lot of this work much earlier on. So I guess the one piece of success that I've managed to gain over the past 2 years is convincing the business, so my boss's boss, that we need to look at the process even earlier, and we need to be able to integrate the digital practice that we're trying to launch and engineering work even much earlier than we have been in the past. So that is another piece that we're working on, and it's, again, to the point I was saying earlier, we're changing the way we look at the existing process in order to make sure that this technology actually yields the best outcome. But we're not changing the process to suit the technology, if that makes sense. It's when we were launching and learning from this piece of technology, there were learnings that are related to how we can possibly make our current state better. And so that's the other point. I don't think we launch a technology for technology's sake. Like, knowing that a technology is beneficial, knowing that it is, that there can be a lot of benefits on the downstream, and knowing that if adopted, there will be gains, isn't enough. It has to be along the lines of, there are improvements that can be made on our current state processes, and how to make those changes stepwise, and how to use digital technologies to aid it or accelerate it. Ultimately, again, it's a tool, right? So caveman with a stone, they were trying to hammer something, they go from that to an actual hammer. It means that they have leverage because they have a handle, so they can swing harder, right? But they made, that tool was for something relatively simple, and the improvement should be something that is relatively simple. And I still believe that going through those steps of evolution makes it so that whatever change you're doing becomes more long lasting. So that's my takeaway, I guess, from the past couple of years.
It's a very interesting contribution. Particularly, what it seems to reflect is the increased experience and relationship that you've got with the business and your experience of trying to introduce things and reacting to the response that that's had.
Mhm.
And primarily there, understanding the need to effectively integrate with the business processes and the activities beyond the technology, if you like.
Mhm.
And you seem to be doing that, learning from that, and that seems to be benefiting your implementation. So,
Mhm.
you know, if there's one lesson, I think there's lots of lessons in what you've said. But if there's one lesson for me, it would be that being sensitive to the environment that you're introducing the technology into and being prepared to respond to that is really what you've just said you've done.
I think so. And I think I might even take it a step further to use it's not, this one's not an analogy, but I I will say that when you're dealing with any change, like, and I know we're talking about digital integration, but if you look at it from a change management perspective, ultimately you're not dealing with a piece of technology, or like, well, in some cases you might be, right? As engineers, it's very easy to default to simple direct logic. This works, therefore it should be here, and therefore let me put it in here, and now the process flow will work like this, and ta-da, it works. While true, ultimately, when you're dealing with businesses, you're dealing with people. And again, to my earlier comment, and I hope the analogy of an autoimmune response isn't taken as a as a knock. It's not. It's just me describing the nature, and that is perhaps a perfect analogy to it. But ultimately, the response is coming from people. So being sensitive to how people operate, their level of expertise in the current state of affairs and how processes are done right now is important. You can't just come in with, look at my new shiny flashy idea. This is great. You now must do it. Um, that never that never sits well with anybody, right? Even as an engineer, we can get used to our ways of doing certain analyses, or certain things being a truism, but ultimately, perhaps as technology grows, whatever was true before, or whatever was a limitation before, is no longer a limit, and we don't recognize it. So not being on being technology sensitive and being open-minded is one thing, but to recognize that there are people that you have to gain buy-in from, uh, and going through those steps to actively generate that buy-in prior to selling something as the ultimate solution, which rarely is it ever, is important.
Wonderful. Thank you. I'd like then to follow up on that by asking, have your future plans changed, or what are your future plans now, compared to what you talked about before?
So I was rewatching the interview, and a lot of our discussion was focused on launching that piece of digital technology that we call BIM, we're calling BDC now. Um, the answer is yes and no. So I think the no, I'll describe the no part of why nothing's changed, because I still think that piece of technology, from the scope of our conversation that we had 2 or 3 years ago, that hasn't changed, because the focus is still, we want to launch this piece of technology. We believe this piece of technology to be beneficial, and the digitization of how we build will allow us to scale in certain ways faster. If we don't, for instance, AI nowadays, well, we were already talking about it maybe 2.5 years ago, but certainly no one was playing around with AI generated images the same way as it's been done now, right? So to leverage actual AI, to do any design, or any, like, this is very, very future state stuff that I'm talking about, right? Obviously, we're not touching it now, but you know, trying to scan 2D drawings into an AI system and telling it to play around with that, versus having a digitized model of all the homes that we build, I would imagine, it's a pretty clear winner of how much information you're handing over to the AI to process. The 3D model would be leagues above, right? And that would yield, if anybody's played with the image generator that's so popular nowadays, the more information you feed it, the better the AI provides an outcome, right? That's again, it's another truism for our day today. So if that's what we're seeing now, having a digitized outcome for our designs is still as important as when we first talked 2.5 years ago. So that's the no part to why, the goal of that particular subset of my work hasn't changed. But the yes part is, I think, again, the same way as my scope has increased and has changed, my title from BIM and strategic sourcing to applied technologies, the way I view the scope of what I can bring as impact to Mattamy has also changed. So not necessarily changed, but widened, I would say. So my in my current role, I try not to use the word R&D or research and development simply because that again becomes more of a pigeonholing statement than applied technologies would be. But ultimately, I think what the team that I've created will bring benefit to Mattamy for is a way to look at new technologies and find a test bed for it and have it incubated without disrupting how our operations goes. And then having again, within my team, the relationship buildup that you were referring to earlier, knowing where the pain points are and then working with the business to find a non-disruptive way to implement any of these, identified applicable applied technologies that we can launch, and then sort of feeding it into the business in a sensible way is the way I look at what I'm doing. So it's not going to be just limited to one piece of digital technology. It could be, hardware improvements. It could be process changes, which I alluded to earlier, and many other things that improves the business. So ultimately, my goal of making the way we do home building better has not changed, but the approach to it and my sense of purpose in terms of the scope that I might be able to touch, that has changed. Hopefully that makes sense.
Yeah, I think so. And it seems to suggest that your relationship with the business is closer and broader, which seems that would be a reflection of an increased confidence and recognition of the value of what you do.
I certainly hope so.
So do I. Okay, my last question's quite simple, but at the same time very open. It is you gave advice at the end of your interview last time to the people who were watching it, and I thought I'd give you the same opportunity again to really just say now you're you're a bit older, a bit more experienced. What advice would you give today?
It's again, interestingly enough, and I think I forgot if we talked about it earlier. I'm pretty sure we did, but when when you asked me for a follow-up, I told you straight up that I couldn't remember where things sat during our last interview because so much has happened in the past couple of years. And so I did rewatch the recording of our last interview, and what I will say right here, right now, is that everything I said during during the advice portion of our interview still rings true to me today. And it's the advice that I would give myself if I was talking to myself back then too. So nothing from that has changed, but I will add one more thing that we didn't necessarily talk about, and I think sort of underscores some of the learnings that I've had that I've shared with you and your whoever will watch this video today, which is staying nimble is a bit of an important task. So never being too engrossed into what is right or what you think is right or wrong, and keeping that open mind, keeping that creativity, and keeping at the back of the mind at your mind to know that what you're doing is new, right? And well, anybody who's looking at digital management or looking at integrating new technologies, what you're doing is new. And even though it's new, it's flashy, it's shiny, it's apparently better, you don't know what the benefits truly are or how to fully integrate the benefits until you actually deploy. So keeping an open mind, being nimble, being willing to pivot, and also just simply being able to admit that you were wrong, I think is an important attribute for anybody who intends to go down this path. And it is a very fun path, because you're looking at new stuff, but don't also do not disregard what is, and I think this was part of what I said last time too, but do not disregard the existing ways, because there's there's a reason why it's existing. It works, right? And so learning from why the existing way works, and why there might be a sort of a mismatch in terms of perception to what this new way is, will give you an in to figure out how to actually deploy this properly. And ultimately, it's not about deploying the technology. Again, as I said, that widened scope and widened perspective on what we're actually trying to do is we're trying to make improvements, right? So sometimes taking a couple of steps back and knowing certain improvements need to be made before you can fully realize the benefits of that technology it really is important. And finally, I think it's and I'll give a shout out to the company I work for, Mattamy Homes. Working for and finding a company with leaders that are open-minded and are willing to let you experiment, willing to let you exist, right, is very important too, because not a lot of businesses are willing to spend the time, the effort, the resources to look at things differently if things are already working, right? The whole adage of why fix it if it ain't broken, rings true in a lot of businesses. But working for a business and being in an environment where change is welcomed as long as it brings improvement and as long as you can prove it, that is of in my mind of ultimate importance, simply because without the support of senior management across multiple different departments, what I'm trying to do right now, like it wouldn't happen, and I wouldn't be sitting here talking to you about it, because simply this role or this team that I'm building wouldn't exist.
Thank you for talking to me, Derek. The advice you provided there, I think, is very solid advice. So one of the messages there would be to stay humble and responsive, to listen. And this, of course, is a message that we emphasize very strongly. But not everyone does it. There are lots of people who don't do it, and there are negative consequences from that. And it's fascinating to me to be able to talk to you again after the 2 or 3 years since we've spoken before, and to see how things have progressed and to see how your views have changed and what you've learned from your experience. It's very impressive, and I'm grateful to you for talking to me about it.
Well, thanks for having me back, and pleasure is all mine.